To IMAGI-NATION TV for this week's episode. There's a bit of chaos going on at the moment. There's some vocal warm-ups happening next door. Someone's opening the garage next to me. So welcome to our home studio. We're pumped today to reflect on listening, and throughout the course of the week, we're going to look at what listening means as we work on different ideas throughout the course of this time as we come together on IMAGI-NATION TV. And often listening comes when we're forced into moments of silence, when we're forced to be still. And in many ways, this current pandemic has put us in a place where we're forced to face a lot of stillness. We're not moving to all of these different arenas where we might usually go to. And that's created a very fascinating time for listening and reflecting on what the world looks like. Today's panel is going to move us through a number of different topic areas. So let's jump into the video that's going to introduce the panel and get us moving.
If you don't want to work, don't bother dreaming.
Shame is just nothing.
All of us are dealt different cards, and those cards can be awful, but it's what you do. You are responsible for your reaction.
Today on the panel, we have Professor Irene Watson joining us. We have Siena Stubbs, we have Sue Murray, and we have Sophie Ryan. Everybody, thank you for being a part of the panel. Siena, I want to go to you first. Tell me, what does listening mean to you?
You know, for me, growing up, listening has been about listening to my mothers and the family members around me who have so much to teach me. And with listening, I've had to learn about my culture and everything that makes me who I am. And with listening, that's the main way that we learn, like Yolngu people and like most Aboriginal people around Australia. It's through telling stories and learning. So that's what listening really is and means to me.
Irene, can you tell us a little bit about your story through navigating the complexity of the educational journey that you've been on, and the ways that you've had to weave in and out your listening skills through a number of different forms and modes.
I think for me, I thought, what's the earliest thought and memory I have about listening? And I think it was as a small child, and just being with family and observing. I mean, when I say small child, I think I was about 4 or 5 years old, and observing the conversations. But it was also the interrelationship with the natural world, because I was listening to a story that my mothers and aunties were talking to each other about the willy wagtail and the bird itself and what it means to us. And it's a bird that comes and communicates and tells us. It's a warning, but it's also a communicator about how we might think in a particular situation. So it was listening, but listening to the old people, listening to family, but also listening to the natural world itself, and also the thought, and very much what Siena said is very true for myself as well as an older person, that listening is how we learn, and listening informs how we learn how to live a good life and our relationship to all things that we live with. But it's listening. It's not just listening with our ears. It's also listening. When we talk about deep listening, it's listening with our whole being. How our whole being takes in and observes and listens to all things around us. That's what informs learning. But that's where I began, and pretty much that beginning has been what has centered and navigated my life, and continues to inform and help me navigate my life now as an older person who happens to be, an academic. So it's an old ancient practice of ours that has informed myself in this different world of modernity.
When we have our ear pods in a lot of the time, and we have information coming to us, Sophie, you're in a world within the walls of Sony where there's so much wonderful creation, and then also so much noise coming through as we're trying to create music and have people listen to music and listen to stories. How do you listen deeply when it's so busy in the world that you're in?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose even on a practical front, even just working in the office of Sony, there is so much noise. Like, even going to open plan, the way that people want to work now, and working in an entertainment company, you're right, Jack, there is so much noise, and it's sometimes really hard to stop and listen. I think we get a lot of inspiration from the artists because they will always speak about how they want to listen to their fans and they want to learn to hear their fans. And I think what's hard or getting more difficult now is that the more digital that we become and the more there are so many social platforms out there, how do you know that what you might be hearing on your social platform or all these different mediums of where you think people can talk to you is the way that people are actually communicating properly and honestly about it? And so I think this pandemic has really helped with us, just so you can hear my daughter in the background. I think that pandemic has really helped us now just stop all that other noise that's going on and try and work out how to really listen to people the old way and the proper way. And that's not always through all the noise and the social platforms and things like that. Yeah,
we have this, the frame from which we put a question around, often dictates the answer. And I think when we listen to Siena and Professor Watson talk about, as we move to listening deeply, and as you just touched on there, Sophie, I was thinking about this idea the other day, and it's just so phenomenal life. Like, we had an astrologist on here, this young Aboriginal woman who's doing phenomenal work, and she just loves the stars. And, unless you're taken to thinking about the stars by somebody, you're kind of lost in your world, which is often the human world. And we think at the bottom of the ocean, at the very, very bottom of the ocean, there's lots of spots where human beings will never go to. and I wonder what life would look like down there, and that's a world. And then there's the sky, like there's these birds just flying around the sky all the time, and are traveling all around, and these huge eagles that are flying around, and they're just in the sky now. And then you have a universe outside of it with all of these planets, and that's just what we know within the universe. So all the things that we can listen to. And then we get to human relationships. Before then, often we forget our connection to trees, and that trees can talk to us, and that plants can talk to each other, and then there's animals, and there's so much to listen to. Sue, how the heck do we try and build our brains to make sense of all of this information? How do we try and work out what's important when we're listening?
Well, I think listening's a really good topic for me to be talking about actually today, Jack, because it's one of the best tools that we have in regard to preventing suicide. And of course, that's the area that I work in, suicide prevention. And, that skill of listening with an open heart and an open mind is probably the most important skill that we can ask people to develop when they are trying to support someone who is vulnerable towards taking their own life. So, often we hear, you ask about how do we actually move all of this stuff through our minds. One of the biggest challenges for those who are vulnerable to suicide is that they can't see any other option at that moment in time. And so many different pressures have come upon them from many, many different areas. And that ability to be able to shift those out of their minds and focus is one that's really challenging for them. So we really, I think it's often people are very concerned about working and talking with people who may be suicidal. But believe you me, having an open heart and an open mind and being non-judgmental is the best thing that we as a community can do in order to support people who are vulnerable to suicide.
And we'll often move to a place where something is spiky, or we're afraid of getting it wrong. And as you said, we might just sort of shut it off and go, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing to someone who said they're suicidal, so maybe I will just not say anything at all. Or this person's come to me and said they're feeling really angry, and I don't quite know how to talk about anger, so maybe I shouldn't say anything at all. And perhaps the answer actually is you don't have to say anything.
Not say anything, but to listen. Yes.
We've got some comments and questions coming in from the chat line on YouTube. So thanks everyone for jumping in today. We've got Rianne Miller saying, so excited to hear from Auntie Irene and Siena. We've got Shayaka from Uganda saying, listening, excited for this one. We've got Vicky saying, important lessons, transitioning culturally through listening. Sorry, the chat line just jumped on me. Tom Wensley's got a question, which is for the whole panel. How do we use listening to ground us and be mindful? Take it away.
So maybe I'll start with that one. Just following on from what I just said, I think using and developing the skill to listen, and as both Irene and Siena were saying, listening not just to words, but listening to the feelings that are being expressed. And I think that's one of the things that mindfulness does teach us, is to actually listen from within ourselves, to actually not just hear what someone is saying, but to develop a level of understanding, develop a level of empathy, to be able to work with and support people who are being challenged in many different areas, not just in my area.
That's right, Sue. What I was thinking with listening and being mindful is everyone has things that they might know more about and that you might be an expert in or that you might not know about. And so when you're listening, you're mindful that you might not know about this topic and you take a step back to listen to people that might have a better idea of what that is. And with that type of listening, you're being mindful about respecting other people's position in certain places.
Well, I'm enjoying listening to the conversation, so it's I could float away and just be quiet and continue to listen. But it's heartening to hear all of those different responses and responses, because I agree with them all. I think that the notion of deep listening is what brings about that connection to being mindful. And by being mindful, the practice of being mindful also helps us to become grounded. So it's all connected. There's a relationship with this idea of deep listening, of being able to once again, and one of the opportunities that this pandemic has given us is the opportunity to sort of stop, and perhaps even think again. And in that process, even while we might feel that we're isolated and alone and thinking, well, there's no one actually even to listen to, there's a whole world and planet out there that we're listening to, but in a quieter space where we've been brought to sort of stop and reflect and think about the big things in this life that are important, and one of them being our relationship to each other as human, but not only that, I think more importantly, how humanity relates to the natural world. So there's a lot of listening going on in terms of how we're rethinking our relationship, because at the moment there's a lot of chatter about what's happening to the human, but there's an opportunity to think about all of the relationships, all the relationships that all living peoples have and beings have at this moment, when we have this opportunity to sort of stop and think. So there's a real positive there. It's an opportunity also.
I think in hearing all the panelists speak, it reminds me actually of an experience that I had in my previous job, and where Sue, when you were talking about the importance of non-judgment, and I think if you don't listen, that's where judgment and prejudgment can happen. And in this case, I remember working. Hang on, I might just come back to you. Can you come back? My little daughter's crying.
Yeah, gotcha. I got you.
Come back. 2 seconds.
All good. Hey, Siena, one of the things which I struggle with doing stuff early in leadership. So I, started AIM when I was 19, and at 17 I got a scholarship to go to uni. And when I got the scholarship, I said, look, I want to put something back in my life, and anything I do, I'm going to do something big. So I sort of talked my way into doing something. And I didn't yet, I'm only just starting to learn stuff at 34. And when you're young, I feel like it's really hard, because you're like, I know something, and I want to share it. How do you wrestle with trying to establish yourself as knowing something and listening? How do you balance those two and know when to speak and when to listen?
There's this, going through, I think with my culture and growing up around my mothers and all those important people in my life, you sort of grow to know when to listen and when it is your turn to speak. The other thing is that I've always been given the what do you call it, the confidence able to speak when I need to speak, and given the reassurance to say, this is your chance, this is your time when you're allowed to speak and say something, which has helped me understand the best time to speak, and then also the best time to step back and also listen to people who might know more than I do. Yeah.
Annie, Irene, we've got a question from Kat Pirelli, which is saying there's so much information out there. How do we know who we can trust to listen to?
Well, that's something that's everyone's journey to find out and to learn. And for some of us, like, you know, Siena, again, some of us are really privileged in having having a whole community of elders and old people that have been such wonderful mentors. So it's an inspiring way to learn. And for those who and there are many young people that I'm familiar with who have grown up differently. It's a different time, and may not feel that connection. So how may they reconnect? And I think that's the challenge for people who are feeling isolated and in that space is that it is a challenge, and it's a journey. And it's doable because we've been doing it in this country for, you know, again, to say it yet again, but it is so true. We've been doing it forever, you know, growing community, growing peoples, growing all of our differences and relationship to our different environments. So there's a fabulous wealth of knowledge that lives in the land, and we're so fortunate. And the communities, and I'm fortunate for the way that I was able to grow up in having fragments, even though in the South where colonisation had such a huge impact, particularly around coastal regions where I grew up. Nevertheless, I still feel a sense of gratitude that there were the old people in my life that were in my life. So that grounds us and informs us. But we should never give up hope in feeling where some may feel disconnected and isolated from community and from a whole community of elders. As I said, it's a challenge and it's a journey, and you know, a journey that we should all be on and taking to inform relationality and how we are connected and we're not isolated, and that there's a wealth of knowledge that lives in this country.
So I've got a thought I've been sort of sitting on for a little bit with this current moment, and I think the average screen time for a teenager was up to, at least in US, Canada reports en masse, 7+ hours a day that teenagers were accessing screen time outside of school. And, I've grown up in a period just before I was born, just before Google came to life, just after around the time when the internet, really came into play. And we've gone to this space where, Arnie, Irene and Siena were talking about mentors and guides in our life, where that was in the physical world, to then suddenly having this huge swathe of people that can have influence over us. And when now that filter of where we get information from is largely dictated by Google, that have a couple of vested interests, including selling some advertising. And then we have the WhatsApp and the TikToks and the Instagrammers and the YouTubers who have unearthed this generation of peer-related guides, and often not coming from academic perspectives, but coming from an experiential perspective, some really valuable, some really dangerous. And right now, what I think is fascinating is the teachers have suddenly arrived online. There's 7 hours a day of screen time, and suddenly the teachers have turned up. They're the biggest YouTubers in the world. We've suddenly got, 7 hours of teachers being celebrities. How do we in the 21st century fight for reputable authorities to have influencers online and offline, people that have done 30, 40 years in a field that can help us guide? How can we do that as we try and reshape the way the world works in the post-COVID times?
Look, I think that's a pretty challenging thing to do. I guess what I'd like to say is that the online world often gets denigrated for its influences in a negative way. But, my colleagues who've worked in the digital space, particularly with young people, those at reachout.com, the Young and Well Centre, you know, they have done some very, very positive things and utilise the online world for really very positive and very good things. And I think that's, you know, we don't want people to think that the digital environment is an environment that we don't want them to be in. It is part and parcel of our lives. How you actually navigate the right and the wrong, we need to teach people from a very young age, because, gosh, you know, I see my granddaughters on screens at the age of 2 and 3, and so, you know, young people are growing up in this digital world. It is part and parcel of their lives, and so we need to ensure that there are ways and means for those of us who guide younger people for us to understand what are the right tools that we should be directing young people towards, so that they can use this as a very positive learning environment. I still think that human connection, though, will forever be important. And I think if there's anything positive that's come out of the COVID-19 isolation, it is that the whole concept of family, whatever that means for you, has become much stronger again. And I think that's a good thing for our community.
Absolutely. We've flown through the allotted time, so we'll finish up with a cheat sheet, 6 words or less, your tips to 15-year-olds who are trying to work out how to listen. Sophie.
Don't prejudge, and I think knowledge will often speak, but I've been told that wisdom will listen.
Thank you, Sophie. Thanks for joining us on the show, and thanks for navigating mum life and doing it all. You know, as all the mums in the world, I think, deserve every possible medal that can ever be bestowed, and it's the toughest job on the planet. And if one thing can also come out of this time, hopefully it's a realization from a lot of traditional household setups that how much mums do and how much sacrifice that women have made over the course of human history. And thank you for navigating all those worlds and coming on the show and still being a part of it.
Kids at home.
Hey, Siena, 6 words or less listening tips for a 15-year-old.
Know the right time to speak.
Perfect. Hey, good luck at university next year and look forward to hanging out. Hopefully you'll be a mentor with us.
Thank you.
Oh, good. Auntie Irene, what's your 6 words or less for a 15-year-old?
Be kind to yourself in your stillness.
Beautiful. Thank you for leading the way and for being a person who's shown us what's possible and blazing trails for us all follow through. So thanks so much for all the work you've done in your life, and keep going, keep charging ahead and bringing us with you. And Sue, final thoughts, 6 words or less for a 15-year-old on listening.
Well, mine would be, when you hear an opportunity, seize the moment. Take every opportunity you can. You never know where it's going to take you, and it could be life-changing.
Magical. Sue, Sophie, Siena and Auntie Irene, thank you so much for joining us on the panel today to be a part of IMAGI-NATION TV. Okay, that wraps up our Thinkers segment, and we're going to move through the topic of listening this week. We're going to finish today with an interview with Uncle Noel Nanup, and I was lucky enough to catch up with Uncle Noel a few years ago in Perth in Western Australia and sit down and have a conversation about listening, about life, and about why we're here and what we're trying to do. So we're going to finish with that interview. If you want to support IMAGI-NATION TV, you can head to aimmentoring.com. We're currently selling This Hoodie Pays Rent hoodies, which are helping people pay their rent. So you can register as a hoodie connector if you're struggling to pay your rent, and $30 of every hoodie that you sell will go directly to yourself to help you cover your rent. You can also grab an IMAGI-NATION TV hoodie, IMAGI-NATION hoodie, or give a donation to help us do this work. From next week, we're coming into this show with a much more significantly revamped schedule. So we're going to have a sponsor school or a partner school alongside every episode. We'll have 10 kids in the live audience. And then we're launching for the first time ever Imagination classrooms, which will be happening straight after the show. Our local mentors and every one of our universities around the world we'll host a live Imagination classroom straight after the stream. In Australia, that'll happen straight after the live stream. In South Africa, they'll replay the stream and then they'll host Imagination classrooms. And we're hoping that we'll have between 100 to 200 happening straight after the show within a 24-hour period. So that'll mean that kids have a chance to be able to reflect on the lessons of what's been covered by those on the show that day, and then to ask some questions for some help around their schoolwork, some questions around life, and then to engage in failure time, which is something that AIM's designed over the last 16 years to help kids get out of this idea that learning is shameful or putting your hand up is something that is dangerous, and to be brave in embracing a failure mindset to learning, because the greatest lesson I've learned with learning is it's about picking yourself back up off the floor time and time again, and then just going and learning all the wisdom from falling down. So we're going to now go listen to Uncle Noel, and we'll see you all tomorrow, and we're pumped to bring you that revamped format from next week. Thanks for tuning into Imagination TV, and I might pop back on the other side of the interview with Uncle Noel.
I got injured playing footy, Aussie rules.
Yeah.
Ended up in the hospital.
Yeah.
And
she was a nurse.
She was a nurse.
I could see it.
And I woke up and I looked up and I saw her and I thought, shit, I've died and gone to heaven. She was stunning. And so I was thinking to myself, can I be old and brash enough to ask her out? And I did.
I was going to introduce you formally, Uncle Noel, but I reckon we might just start with that story. I think the
You
camera's
reckon?
rolling, so kids, that's how you find love. What I thought was we'd just go for a bit of a wander through time. You've lived what I think is an amazing journey from what I've heard. So do you want to take us back in time through Australian history a little bit, through the lens you've seen, when you were born and the country you're kind of looking at now?
Well, I was pretty lucky, Jack. I was born into a big family. I come in at number 8, being the youngest boy. The others had left home by the time I was, early teens. And I had to cut all the wood, and we lived in the bush.
And where was home?
Home was Geraldton.
Yeah. And what year was that,
beautiful place
Uncle?
to grow up. I was born in 48.
Okay.
But we didn't have houses. We lived in tents. And it's hard for kids nowadays to understand that, people lived in tents all the time.
Yeah.
And we had 5 great big tents. And
in Geraldton?
Yeah. 3 of them were army tents in natural bush out of town. It wasn't until I got to year 7 that a teacher said to me, I'll never forget these words. He said to me, Noel, I want you to remember this. I know you're going on to year 8. He said, no one will look after you the way you want to be looked after, better than you. And then he said also, I want you to remember this, one person can make a difference. So they were locked away and indelibly imprinted on my mind. I go on to year 8. And that day at the high school, Mr. Timmerman said to me, Noel, I want you to remember these 10 two-letter words. If it is to be, it is up to me. And I had the other 2 sayings. And I've grown up with all those sayings. And I live by them. And I was on my way. And I thought, I've got to do something for the mob. And I made a conscious effort then to go to uni. Eventually graduated and got a piece of paper that said I was an expert. Thank you.
Well done. What a journey.
In cultural heritage management, I got an associate diploma in applied science and came home. And I was focused on coming home. But while I was in Canberra, I met, Foley.
Yeah. Big personality.
Met Udjuru Nunakul, met Charlie Perkins, all these people that I just absolutely, looked up to. They were my role models. There were people who'd been to the cutting edge and back again.
What was it like coming back home after spending time with people like Charlie Perkins and Udjuru and all of these amazing characters? How did you come back home?
Oh, look, I was on a high. That's when I met the family that were happy that I'd done what I'd done, and those that thought, too good for us now.
Yeah, talk us a little bit about that. So you came back and first in your family, graduate from uni. How do you deal with those family members that were like, oh, no,
I know. It's something I just had to say to myself, well, okay, that's where they're at, you know, and this is where I'm at, and I'm focused on this, and I've got goals now that I want to achieve. So I said, that's the way you want to think about it, or by all means, you know, you go ahead with that. It's not going to stop me.
Hey, to finish us up,
Yep.
I want you to take us into the future a little bit. So 1948.
Yep.
You know, you've grown up in the bush, in a tent with your family. 100 years on from that 1948, what do you see the world looking like for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids in 2048?
Oh, I see it a lot better, you know, because people are now starting to look at letting us use our brain. I would say we'll have doctors, lawyers, you know, thousands of them around the countryside looking after ourselves. There may be even universities that specifically for our mob, and others will come to that because they want to learn about our way, you know, because right here under the noses of all Australians is this ancient culture, and the culture is genius. It really is. We need to educate not just our future leaders, youngsters, but the non-Aboriginal world as well. So I can see a really cram-packed, full, exciting Australia coming up in 2048.
Thank you so much for everything you've done in your life, and for inspiring me and inspiring us and the youngsters that are coming afterwards. And
it's just been
a pleasure to have you talking to the AIM TV land. So thank you, Uncle, for spending the time with us. And
no worries at all.
Thank you for everything you've done in your life.
Yep. Take care.
See you guys.
Catch ya.
It's a similar time to when Uncle Noel was growing up, living in tents. There were people living in similar conditions in the United States. And one character we might have heard of before is Martin Luther King Jr. Now the thing with MLK's work, which has been widely publicised, has been his civil rights campaign leading up until the I Have a Dream speech. What hasn't been publicised that much is for the last 5 years of his life on this earth, MLK was working on the idea of a universal basic income. He was working on an idea of supporting all poor people, and it actually pulled together a push that would see all people move towards Washington, DC, a few weeks after he was assassinated, and then bring together a huge tent city to show Washington, DC what it looked like to live in poverty. Now, tomorrow morning, we're going to have a very special Imagination TV episode talking about universal basic income and looking at what does the economic future look like for Australia and for our other societies as we try and navigate significant inequality today. We've got Frey and Osborne have delivered a report in 2013 from Oxford saying that 49% of jobs in the US alone are under threat in the next 10 to 20 years with automation on the way. And tomorrow we're going to go into that complex conversation because you can't operate in isolation without economics if you want to see the world change like we do. And tomorrow we're going to catch up with Mark Carnegie and a bunch of people who have been looking at this topic from both sides and explore what are the pros, what are the cons, what are the strong things of our current economic model that should be maintained, and what are the things we want to break and remake. So if you're around tomorrow morning, we'll have a special episode happening at 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, and then we'll have our youngsters segment happening at 12 noon. So we've got a double show tomorrow. Tune in at 9 a.m. Thanks for being a part of the show to everyone today, to Siena, to Sophie, to Susan, and to Professor Irene. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you tomorrow for a special at 9 a.m. on Universal Basic Income. See you again.